This is the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megafoon Rugby.
How's it, everyone, on Lekker Rugby Pod? It's a whole lot better to talk when it's after a win than after a loss. Although our friend Tim Cocker from Egg Chasers informed me that the only country that actually does prefer to go on YouTube and view things after a loss is England. So long may they have practice. We are now basking in the glow and the embers of an incredible historic victory. And so we have to turn at some point and stop talking about the sixth try and that shake and bake and Ethan Hooker and turn our attentions to a larger topic. And so we turn to our good friend, Jon Cardinelli, who is one of those writers that is a must-read. He imbues his articles with facts, not feelings. He always gives you something to chew on. And so without further ado, I'm going to welcome Jon. And Jon, we want to talk about age, correct?
Thanks a lot, Harry. Good to be here. Maybe we shouldn't move on too quickly. It's not every day we win in New Zealand, but as you say, giving us a lot of food for thought, looking to the future, where we stand in terms of age, where we stand in terms of caps. Definitely a lot to chew on, as you say.
Yeah, and what you've done, I think, and I think it is time for us to push on and start to say, what did we learn vis-a-vis age? Because it's that fine line. Every team that wins a World Cup is vastly experienced. They usually have 800, 900 caps on the pitch in the final. But at the same time, within those, they usually have, a Cheslin Colby in 2000, different age groups like Willemse, coming of age early on so that he's able to do it again. What's fascinating about this particular vintage of the Boks is in real time, we're watching the coaches try to learn, is Kobus Reinach's 35 different from someone else's 35? And you've done a fascinating set of analyses that we're going to actually walk through now. And it has to do with, what squads look like. And you've done some yeoman work in comparing 2019, 2023, and what would be in 27. So what I want to start with is sort of have you walk through that in a larger sense. How does this 2025, which is going to be 2027 squad, look in comparison to these other World Cup winning squads?
I think firstly we need to go back to the beginning of the year where Rassie essentially gave us the framework. He gave us 80 plus players that he's looking at. And what I did from that point is I looked at all the ages, the caps, and the projected ages and caps, how it would look in 2027. So now we're 7 games down the line from that, and we can plug in the new data and see where the guys stand. And if you had to project, you look at the squads that's Rassie has picked for the Rugby Championship, who he's used. He's definitely brought in a lot of youngsters through, but is it enough across the age profiles? That's the question. I'm not saying he's got it wrong at the moment, but it's just more of how much more, what more needs to happen in the next few years. Because if you look at where things stand now, we'll probably take about 15 players who are going to be 33 and older at the 27 World Cup. And I think that's double what we had in 23. So there's definitely some room to grow, some room to maybe even out the age groups, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, and you were taking what Rassie's saying at face value, and I think sometimes we've learned that we should do that. And he said no one's going to have more than 8 tests this year, I believe. It becomes a jigsaw puzzle. You have to win. You have to have experience to win, but you also have to have just the right amount of inexperience for guys like Ethan Hooker, Sasha, and then potentially guys like Fanther or Hanekom when they come back. How do you sew that into the fabric? So why don't we take your group sort of, maybe we start with the old guys first because we know them so well and it's maybe more sentimental. But you have people that will be 33 or older in 2027, right? And when you read this, it's household names. When you look this over, Colby, Creel, Dialende, Mapimpi, Pollard, Reinach, Kwacha, Pieter-Steph, just go down the list. You find 23 players who'll be 33 or older. Interestingly enough, guys like Andre Esaezen, which maybe we don't think. And then you kind of go through that and say, who do you think is on the bubble? So take us through, of the 33 and older guys, which ones do you think are a legitimate question now that they actually may not make it to Australia in 27?
Yeah, even like you mentioned, there are people you don't think are going to be old who aren't necessarily old at the moment are in that group. I mean, who is the best player in the Springbok team at the moment? Cheslin Colby. He's going to be 33 at the World Cup. And he's just in the same category as guys who we do assume are going to be old. So he would definitely be one guy who would go. And then you want to build the team around guys like Delende. Jesse Creel's been a great servant for South African rugby in a combination with Delende. You look at the combinations that Rassie's picked in the last 2 years, that midfield combination is probably the most regularly picked combination out of all the combinations across the squad. So that probably tells you he wants to build a team around them. Otherwise, he might alternate that midfield as we saw last week. Guys that might not make it, is it going to be on a case-by-case basis, conditioning-wise, whether they're based in Japan, whether they're based in South Africa? I think that's going to come into play. But if you look at the guys who are going to be really old, I'm talking about 38, 37, Pimpy already. I think that the fact that he hasn't been in the squad the last few games probably gives you an indicator. As we've seen in the past, we can be pleasantly surprised. Guys come back. Rassie doesn't throw anyone away, even if they're in the wider squad, even if he's still keeping them in the mix. Villy Leroux is going to be 38. Even past the 23 World Cup, people are asking, is he young enough to go to that World Cup? And now he's still in the conversation with 27, but will he make it? I think that's the big question. Kobus Reinach, geez, I think you compared him to a border collie shepherding the young guys. Sometimes he seems more like a Rottweiler, the way he takes on a few of the All Blacks forwards. And he's definitely got a bit of spark. There's nothing there that seems to suggest he's an older player. It might just come down to how many games he plays. And I think that's also something we need to consider. There are tiers, I think, that Rassie picks. He will pick like an older guy, a younger guy, and then like a really younger guy. So it will be a case of taking Faf or Kobus in that final squad of 33, 34. And I think that's how it work. I'm just guessing, but I just look at how he selected over the past 8 years. That seems to be the way he does think. He wants to take a older guy and a couple of younger guys, or middle tier guy and a younger guy, like Herschel Yankees in 2019. It needs to be a good mix of players, I can put it that way. And I don't think you'll throw away anybody completely, but we will see it kind of being in the next couple of years. He will kind of phase a few guys out, put them on the periphery, if I can put it that way.
There's fantastic graphs that you sent us at Lekker Rugby Pod, and we'll find a way to depict them in the best possible way on socials, but also on this video, perhaps. You basically look at not just the age that people will be at 27, but also you project how many caps they'd have, which is an important thing as well. Not just on the old guys, because that's about wear, tear, strain. How much can Franco Mostert take? How many more tests of 10 rocks, 10 tackles, and 6 carries can a guy like that take? And but it's also super important in the younger one. You want to look at a guy like Johnny Roche, or you want to see a guy like Bester or Hanekom. Is how many caps do you need to bed into them? But looking at the older guys, 33 and over, what I was interested is that you kind of rank them on front runners, and the ones that I think have serious doubts, besides Villy, like you've alluded to, Mapimpi, it's guys like Bongi and Bonambi. It's a household name. Vinnie Koch, his mate in the front row. Like I said, Mostert, and then obviously Dion Ferry. Other ones that you say are more on the bubble would be Faf de Klerk and Lucanio Arm. So looking at Lucanio Arm and Faf de Klerk and probably Mostert, 2025 has been kind of hard on those guys, hasn't it? They're almost like, remember me. What do they have to do to get back into the discussion of being, more firmly in that 40-man squad, 35-man squad?
I mean, it's we've had this conversation about the number 8. Injuries change things very quickly. So just from the outset, I must clarify for people out there, this is assuming everybody's available, everybody's fit for the World Cup, and maybe like where it's ranked according to how Rassie has used the players. Lucanio Am has fallen out of favor, but he's had his problems with injuries, but Jesse's kind of taken that position. I think he played for the Sharks last week in a warm-up game, so he's on the way back. Personally, if I took my own opinion, I think I'd love to see him there, but it just depends on the kind of mix that Rassie wants for that final squad. And if Jesse doesn't make it, then Lukhanyo just comes straight in. I think that's why when in drawing up these squads, it's just amazing how neatly everything fits. Like how it just shows you how Rassie has thought across the different age groups. So if this guy gets injured, I'm going to slot this guy in. There's like a plan for everything. When you put these all together, you see, how we could pick across age groups, who would come in. But as you're saying now, like if gun to your head, everyone's available, there are going to be some brutal omissions. And you can't take 15 guys who's 33 and older to a World Cup. And I'm saying that based on what they've done in the last World Cup. People criticize them for taking 7 guys who were 33 and older at the World Cup. So there are going to be some brutal omissions. Injuries might force Rassie's hand, but there's going to be some changes.
I think we agree on this. Frans van Herbe comes healthy, he's in, right?
Yeah, I would love to see him come in just in terms of the value adds to the squad as well. And I think he also, as I said with the scrum off, he falls into that older guy category. You can have guys like Jan-Hendrik Wessels. Wilco's not exactly an old guy, but he's a little bit younger in the experience departments. You definitely need an old head there. And that's why I think maybe Rassie won't throw Vinnie Cock away, completely. Because what happens if Frans van Herbe doesn't come back? Then at least you have another older guy can come in. The challenge, I think, now going forward is when you're picking 33, 34-man squads to go overseas at the end of the year, you'll see some guys being left out of those squads because Rassie will know what he has in them, but he's got to get the other guys up to a certain amount of caps now. He's got to, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, bringing that on the other side of the chart, those guys 25 and younger, you've got to get more of those guys involved, more of the guys who are 26 and 29 years old involved to kind of even it up, to kind of grow the pool on that side of the chart. But definitely, I agree with you.
Yeah, in your front runners column, that's still more people. There's still more players in that than even the 30 to 32, which we'll go to next. So even the composition of the squad, if you look at it and you've depicted it in sort of a dark blue, which helps. I look at front runners there and I see it is still a spectrum. There's still more guys that are going to be 33 and then 30 to 32. And then, you just keep going down until you maybe only have 2 front runners, a guy like Ethan and Sasha from the young. So looking at the 30 to 32 in 2027, that's what we're talking about. That's super intriguing. This is where it actually gets even more like everyone in that first column, that if they were healthy and they know what, they're going to fit into the game plan and they're not going to let the side down. And then you have these obvious people who are probably going to be phased out. In 30 to 32, it's interesting because we don't even think of these guys as being in that slot sometimes. Mani Lubbock, Kurtley Arendse, Grant Williams. He's a guy you just think perpetually young. He's Jasper Wiese, Mark van Saden, Argees Sneeman. So it's interesting when you go down this list that you can tick off these names as well. And the questionable ones are guys to me like Kobus Wiese. Like what do the coaches think about him? He goes on these tours, he's picked in the squad, but then he doesn't get on the field in situations where you almost think obviously you'd have a guy like that. So where's the trust there? Jean-Luc Dupree, who keeps getting all the hoodies and the practice jerseys, but never gets on the pitch. What do you think about some of these guys in the 30 to 32 range? Steenekamp, someone that I've been kind of forgetting for a while. Do you think that's still, even though they didn't get on the field as much, they're absolutely in that sort of picture of the 35 to 40-man squad?
As a Steenekamp, definitely. I think him and Ulrich Lowe from last year are probably the breakout players of the year for the Springboks. Unfortunately, both of them injured this year. You can see how it's changed the complexion of the loose forwards and the front row. Even though Steenekamp only made his debut in 23, he's been quite an integral part of the match 23 and key to the bomb squad. You mentioned Jean-Luc Dupree. I put him there because I think they're going to pick someone who's an out-and-out utility, and it just becomes a case of who they put in next. So Kobus Wiese will be the next guy off the rank. If you look at the way they might select their squad, they loose forward group, someone like that will be valuable. But as I say, it'll all be tiered. If one guy can't make it, a guy like Kobus Wiese will come in. As you say, that maybe he needs more game time now, end of the year, even against Argentina. So that's all factors into planning to 27.
Yeah, and then that next column, which is guys that are, let's see, what's the next age group? It's 26 to 29. So just on the right side of prime of your career, usually when you're 26, not considered old at all. These guys remarkably include people like Willemse, Mornay, Van den Berg, who didn't get on the field as much, but he also was used in critical moments enough where you think he is ahead of Papier, he is ahead of Jaden Hendrikse. He clearly seems to be the guy that's even ahead of Faf. So do you see Mornay van den Berg as the clear third ranked scrum off if it was, gun to your head, knockout game, everyone healthy?
Well, I think Rassie's shown his hand for this tour to New Zealand. Mornay was there before Faf was there. And it'll just be a toss-up between Kobus and Faf. And Jaden seems to have fallen out, which is kind of a pity in a way, because Jaden is part of like the young guns, the 25 and younger, which will bring the overall age of the squad down. But Mornay just seems more of a fit for the kind of game they're trying to play. And just... I think he's probably the front runner for that third position. Even if that's the ranking, he'll be one of the three if they take three to the World Cup.
Yeah, and you look at guys like Wessels, Ruan Nortje, Elrich Low, Mornay van den Berg. They're definitely part of this group that is experienced in winning. Like they haven't had that sort of, there's no bad memories about going to New Zealand or facing the All Blacks. They missed on the 57s, and they just come in and they're full of life. And if there's one guy we missed a lot this year so far, it's Elrich, probably, because he fills so many gaps at the breakdown, at the line out. He's just one of those operators, incredible dominant tackler. When I look at this list and I sort of pick behind it, you got your obvious ones, Willemse, Van den Berg, who, for me, I'm on the same way as you. Jaden is a change of pace, and so I quite like a Connor Murray type 9 if you need one. But it seems like that's what they want to play like, is the shape. Nortje is absolutely coming into his own. And Wessels is one of those test match animals where you can just sort of like Bismarck him on the field. It doesn't matter where he is. He can be a prop, he can be a hooker. When I look behind some of that stuff, there's not a huge set of players that just scream out, here I am. But Ben Jason Dixon is one who's been in a Bok jersey, had a big injury. He's an energy player. He's not Pieter-Steph Toy, but he's like for like in the sense of size and energy levels. And you have other people like Salman Murat, who looks like he's sort of rotated out. Vincent Chituka, who had intriguing moments so far this year. Kind of looking at that, where do you see maybe, not a bolter, but someone who's sort of maybe not the most obvious pick that comes back into the picture in 26 and 27?
So also you've got to consider the guys that are invited to train earlier this year. Guys like Shakane, Cheswell Yuster, and Hashimpede. Yes. We spoke earlier about those complete bolters like Herschel Yankees, who came through in 2019 to kind of add some energy, and even though they don't necessarily have enough caps, so Rassie really rates them to add something to the mix. And I think if you look at how things are going in terms of how they're selected, Tony Ball, more 5-3 formations across the squads over the past 2 years. We kind of are moving towards younger backs, and we selecting more backs in squads. And speed is like a big factor. And Hashimpede he blew everyone away. I mean, we still got a couple more years to see how he goes to professional level, sure. And Cheswell Yuster is another candidate. Shlakani was smashing people for fun. Those will be the complete bolters, and there's a whole a squad, to be honest, from the junior box that could potentially make the step up, even though Rassie's probably selected them with the 2031 World Cup in mind. Those would definitely be in the mix. Otherwise, we've got these guys who've just played one test. Quan Horn, Ron Fenter, Cameron Honeycomb probably would have played more tests this year if he didn't get injured. Andre Fenter is a bit down the pecking order Andre Hugo Fenter, sorry, in the pecking order of the hookers. But there's definitely some options there, but it's just a matter of getting them more game time before we get to the World Cup. I think that's a challenge for Rassie.
Yeah, in this column of 26 to 29, what jumps out at me is the number of caps you'd have to have in the remainder of this year. Next year, when you have All Blacks coming on that monster Grand Old Tour, and then the truncated matches before 27. It's not that many matches, right? It's you have to sort of pick your guy that you think is going to be the 26-year-old who's going to hit around 20 to 30 caps, because you don't even want a guy like Nortje going into World Cup without having his sufficient cap load. because you just learn something every time you win, every time you lose, and every time you see a line out. And that's where I think it's going to be interesting, because I think Rassie has signaled that he has to get the funnel down a little bit more. It cannot be looking at 80 guys all the time. But if there's one element that you've highlighted here, it seems to be speed. Jaden doesn't have out-and-out speed at 9. Mornay does. Even at 37, 38, Kobus is going to be able to outrun your, neighborhood dog. Grant Williams is the quickest 9 in rugby, probably. Hashim Bede, lightning. It looks like to me that that's where it's going. I mean, if I was even looking to scoop lower than that, I'd go Imbris Papier because he's quick. And guys like Cameron Hanekom, Vincent Chituka, it's the speed that it looks like to me that we're looking at more than old-fashioned power. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. And as I mentioned, it's affecting the way that Rassie's picking his squads. We keep expecting him to throw out a 7-1, throw out a 6-2. He's still got that in the back pockets. You can be sure he's going to be used at some stage, but there's a reason they're picking 5-3s. In terms of how they are using Tony Ball, how they're using the kick chase game, it's taking a toll on the backs, so they need more backs on the bench. And if you look at the composition of the World Cup squad, it might be the World Cup where they actually select the most backs they've ever selected. If I can make a prediction, looking at the way the conditions are in Australia, it's not New Zealand. It's not going to be, besides that third lines test where it rained cats and dogs, it's not going to be the same. I think it's going to be played a month later, which is October, November or something like that. So it's going to be fairly good conditions. So I think they're going to rate themselves to play a bit more expansively, if I could put it that way, even though it's quite simplistic to say it.
No, and I talked to S&C guys at 2 different clubs, one in the ERC, one in Super Rugby, and both guys were telling me that the rate of incidence of injury is getting higher among the backs than it was before. So the whole 7-1, 6-2 thing is even more of a gamble, and the reason they said was because collisions are at a higher speed, the ball is in play more. There's more rucks that are away from the forward base, which are not being cleaned by, Luatiaga. Sometimes they're being cleared by Sasha or cleaned by, your number 12. So that's interesting too. When you go into the sort of the young guys, this is interesting because we're the least certain, right? There's always someone who progresses quicker than we thought, or someone who plateaus. We have our obvious guys, Ethan Hooker, who I got to say looked a lot quicker at the Cape 10 than I'd seen him even at club level. I mean, he left some guys for dead. Maybe it's a matter of that he doesn't lose his speed through a match. I don't think of him as having top-end speed, but he left people for dead, including Finlay Christie, who's a quick man. And then Sasha. Those two seem nailed on already, even at their tender age. And then obviously Kane and Moody. But you look behind that, behind Moody, Hooker, and Sasha, you have so many names. Which ones appeal to you? Which jumps out at you? Like you have Hartzenberg, you have Drenza Julius, you have Hashim Bede that we keep talking about, and is one of those players you look at and you say, I know he's going to be good. I don't know how, where, and when, but the guy's got, everything. But then you look at other people behind that. Besides the names I've just name dropped from your chart, is that kind of where we are? Or do you think there's someone else out there like that you could actually project as being in the picture in 27?
I think this is actually the crux of the issue. I mean, it was only 3 months ago when you asked me the same question on this pod, who do you think is going to be the guy to watch? And I said Ethan Hooker. And look now, he's played 3 games already. But if you look at what's behind, there's quite a big gap between guys who played a few games, who've been in the squad for a while, and the next set of players. So how do we get these next set of players to come through? Obviously, it's unfortunate Hanekom is out for the year. How long is he going to be out for? It's going to be interesting to see if Rassie broadens the pool a bit, puts a few new names into his depth chart. I thought maybe a guy like Renzo du Plessis, if I'm looking at like open side flank, it's quite specialized. Guys like Kwaka and Siya Kolisi aren't getting any younger, even though I think both will be there. Marco, Rassie rates him very highly because of his work rates. But out and out flanker, I think I'd probably go for him. Hanekom, when he's fit, will definitely be on the radar. And the guys I mentioned before might break through sooner rather than later. It's a guy like Hashim Bede. Otherwise, it's going to be interesting to see where they go, especially in areas like the front row. We're looking a bit thin.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because so you find your guys and you see them, you have Ethan Hooker and you think, okay, I'll get 20 caps on him before the World Cup. Kanan Moody, a known quantity, maybe gets to 40, depending on how you want to platoon and rest Jesse, Damien, and take care of older bodies like Lucanio. But at some point, someone's going to get these caps, So, you wonder, how can I get enough caps on a guy like Renzo, or maybe even a young guy coming up in at Western Province, like Paul Duplessis. Because open side or flanks, it seems like you have to have someone who can get to that ruck a bit quicker. You look at the Wallabies with Fraser McWright. You look at the Lions playing with Tom Curry and Jack Morgan. It seems like there's still always a place in a game plan where we're having wider rucks and we're having more phases to have quick forwards. And there's fantastic ones coming up. They're not the same mold as Sia, but they definitely are players. At some point, you just run out of caps. If you put all the caps into a big bowl and you said, these are all the available caps, but I still have to win these games, it becomes more and more difficult to see how you do it unless you start picking a group. And you did a fascinating study of basically the age composition of those comparisons, of those World Cup squads. How many in 2019 were in that group? Colby, Galant, Nkosi. And then you had guys like Creel and Arm who were in that mid-20s, Pollard, young 20s. And then you go flash forward to 2023, and you have a different makeup. And then now you're looking at yours for your projected one for 27. Take us through when you compare Rugby World Cup squads in 19, 23, and 27. And what do you see? I know you're projecting, but what do you see as possible differences in how that makeup goes between the young, the mid-20s, older 20s, and 30 above?
Yeah, I think whether we like it or not, it's going to have to be quite an old squad in comparison. I think 2019 is a bit of an unfair comparison because Rassie had only been around for a season and he had trusted a lot of younger guys. So it was just naturally a younger squad that he backed in terms of caps and age. 23 was supposed to be the time that it peaked, and it did peak. And I don't think many people expected guys to go on beyond that, but they're still adding value, especially in Rassie's eyes. You can see the way he's using them. But I think I did this, first looked at this issue after the Freedom Cup series last year. And my whole thing was like, how can we take 4 or 5 guys, 33 or older? And now we're at the point where 14 or 15 of those guys are still in the mix. So it's going to be very tricky to get that balance right. I mean, we're struggling to come up with names that just kind of demand to be picked in those lower categories. And I think that kind of highlights the issue. Rassie will have like a depth chart down to like 20th for every position. So he'll have a good idea. But in terms of guys who demand, in terms of the amount of caps they had, the exposure they had to professional rugby and test rugby, it's not as clear cut. So that is actually the issue about how we get more players from younger age groups through before 27.
Yeah, and what you've done, and it's like fascinating, like a mini chart within the chart, is you've taken these age groups, which I think are fair. And in 2019, there were only 4 players who were 33 and older. And then in 23, that was 7. And this time around, it looks like 14. So the whole dad's army thing, there's a legitimate question. It's not just a made-up issue. In 2019, there were 3 that were from 30 to 32. There's 11 and 23, and we look about on pace for the same this time, about 11. The most interesting part is when you dive down to the young. In 2019, like you say, it was 9, maybe as an asterisk year, and then 3 and 3. So that sounds about balanced. It's where you get to 26 to 29. There was 15 people in the squad in 2019 in Japan. 15. So almost off the squad. 12 in 23, and then 6 right now. It's interesting because when you look at under 20s, you look at the state of the game, you look at the quality, it seems like the quality is up, but still in terms of Bach level, we're not having that influx.
So, yeah, sorry. Also, this is a good time to bring in that this is something that Rassie has said himself at the start of 24 and again at the start of 25. He wants to improve the age profile. He said, We can't have a guys who are averaging, an age of 32 at a World Cup, or 30 even. We need to get younger, and that's just maybe like a natural thing, but also the game they're playing. They're probably going to need more of an engine, or younger guys to play the type of game they want to play. I mean, and also, they obviously want to balance that with having experience, because you need experience to win a World Cup. And I think that's the point. It's hard to make when you do something like this. You just seem like you just saying play the youngsters, but I don't mean that. It's more like the balance. How do you get the balance right? Because you don't want to throw away guys like Pieter-Steph and even Eben Etzebeth. You could add value in 27. How do you strike the right balance to keep a few of those guys there?
Yeah, and that's the thing, So obviously, in individual positions, there's clearly not any one doctrine or the other, right? If you're looking at third scrum off, Morne van den Berg is definitely going with a younger version than Faf, but it's not going the youngest, which would be more like a Jaden or Ashton. We don't know if we're taking 3 or 4. Rassie's always been difficult to predict, or his coaches, to predict on how many you'll have hookers, 9s, 10s. I think Mari Lubbock was the only out-and-out 10 that went to France to begin with. I know that, Andre was 34A, but
yeah,
that was interesting how willing they are to deviate from conventional wisdom. But when you look at what I'll, call the Cardinelli squad, and I just kind of analyze it, nothing here leaps out as controversial in the way you've done it. So you're not cooking the books here on age. You have Vessels, I think maybe that might be the only one where you go, maybe not, gets into the squad. Beyond that, everyone is sort of absolutely predictable, given injuries. What about this hybridness, if I can call it something, that is introduced by the box, where we should de-emphasize maybe these depth charts and he plays here and this is in number? It seems like more and more, and it's a strength actually that the All Blacks couldn't cope with, we can sort of mix and match and it really comes out okay. Is there a case for best available athletes? My point. I get the best players in there, and even if they're not out and out this, Willems is just good at everything. Put him on there. Grant Williams can play,
I think we've had that since the 2019 World Cup. France Stain being the obvious one. It's kind of developed to the point where a guy like Faf de Klerk can cover 9 and 10. Willems, Sasha can play 3 positions. And I think now that we're going more and more with the 5-3, it gives us more options. So even if you have 3 injuries like we had last week, our bases are covered. I almost think that some of those injuries maybe helped us a little bit, and we got the best combination on the field towards the end. It does give us options, and that's always been, one of Rassie's priorities, to make sure they're covered, especially in the forwards. You saw Marco playing hooker, Dion Fourie playing hooker at the last World Cup. Jan-Hendrik Wessels can cover both. That's going to be interesting to see how they manage him. It's almost better for him, because he's going to end up playing more games in the lead up to the World Cup, and then he's like a unicorn for that 27 squad, because he can cover both, and you can maybe take a player in another position instead of using in the front row.
Yeah. I think you pointed out that Rassie's already used 46 players for the box this season. I'm not sure if you're counting the Baba's game or not, but how many more will you think he'll use extra than above the 46? On the 5-game end-of-year tour.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's really committed to using more. He used 50 last year and he's used 46. So he wants to go above and beyond. And that kind of tells you what we've been talking about. He is thinking about bringing younger and newer players. And even though not necessarily he always brings in younger players, we see like Boone Venter and a few of the older guys, Marnus van der Merwe, potentially they could be huge assets going forward, but they're not necessarily the youngest. And what you mentioned earlier about not having that many tests before the World Cup, I think things have changed a little bit. Next year we have the greatest rivalry and the Nations Cup. However, that's going to work out. But actually 27 is going to be a full rugby championship. So they're going to have a full rugby championship and then maybe a couple tests after that. So that maybe gives them a little bit more wiggle room to experiment. But otherwise, I think at the end of your tour, it's going to be interesting because what we saw in Wellington and Auckland was a nice little mix and match, especially in Wellington. So does he do that for France and Ireland? Obviously, Japan, Italy, and Wales, ideal for rotation. But what we see a bit more mixing and matching versus France and Ireland. It's it's a good opportunity, I think. Some people might be daunted about it. We've just got to win those games, but I think you'll learn a lot from those games if you, like we did in Wellington, playing Sasha, playing Hooker, playing Moody, and a guy like Jan-Hendrik Wessels. I think you'll learn a lot on that tour.
The Italy, Wales, and Japan games do shape as sort of your best opportunity for a trifecta of games where you do explore things like what we just did, where, by happenstance, you had Willemse paired up with Moody in the midfield and then have to shift it and even switch sides on wings. In the 22, you had two playmakers running, almost like old All Blacks used to have. It seems there's part of this is intentional and part of it is just going with the flow, if that makes sense. And I started to think about Tony Brown's system differently, where it's not so much in the X's and O's. Yes, the 4-man pod, and yes, there's more midfield rucks, and the goal is to have a no ruck recycle almost. But I also think there's a mentality of everyone can play ball, and everyone's expected to. And so maybe when we look at, so we used to say you have to bed in combinations. Maybe that's more of a group now, and they're more comfortable with throwing anyone that's been in the camp for long enough time to know the system where they can go in and play, instead of this rigidity that we used to have. So it's really difficult to know. And also it strikes me that Wellington's biggest lesson is, all your plans can just be thrown into upheaval when you have 4 HIAs in a game. Yeah. Speak to that issue of just having this sort of squad versus this rigid kind of list of things I want to do. Rassie's very much a guy who can handle chaos.
Yeah, well, just in terms of the age profile, when I actually, we spoke last night, and then I did something again this morning, just as an exercise, looking at those two games in Auckland and Wellington, and the age profile, because I was a bit nervous before Wellington, to be honest. The team that they picked, just in terms of caps and combinations, and what you're saying now, maybe we shouldn't put too much emphasis on it, but it did give someone a lot of people a pause for thought. But if you actually look at the whole 23, you'll see that yes, there are 3 guys 24 and younger in the starting team, but the bench is actually older than it was in Auckland. And the starting pack hasn't changed much in terms of age composition. There's only really Ruan Nortje and Jan-Hendrik Wessels who are some of the younger players in that forward contingent. So if you think about who's finishing the game, it's quite an experienced game. And at the end of the game, I think someone accosted Rassie, one of the broadcasters, and said, "Is this the future of South African rugby? Youngsters playing." And they did really well, but it was still quite a balanced team. If you look at two teams next to each other. In Auckland, that the backline was very old. Kenan Moody probably the only youngster in that mix. So it'll be interesting to see, which team do they bank on going forward for the big games? Is it Auckland or Wellington? And what that tells us about how they want to play maybe at the World Cup.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm actually looking at what you're talking about, the team blend on my phone right now. And it's not how it felt. I think when you name the team, maybe it's just the way it presents at first with unknown combinations. But it was the same amount of inexperience, just in different places and different times. And then because of the injuries, it ended up being even more similar. But you're right, the bench only had one guy, Wessels, that was in the 26-ish. Everyone else was close to 30 or over 30. It presents so many different intrigues about the importance of experience too. I mean, if you don't have any other information and you just see 2 teams that are in the top 4, and one team sticks on 950 caps and the other one sticks on 600 caps, all the betting money's going to the 900, right?
Yeah.
So, but then the game isn't like that. You need sparks. You need something from nowhere. It's the catalyst, but it's picking the right one, and it's having them ready to go. Ethan Hooker wasn't just thrown into the fire. He was absolutely prepared. He's been prepped all year. You can see it. You can see you didn't worry, So how does that go? Like when you look at this crop, it's almost like we have an abundance of riches, and it's very difficult to just say, here's my guy, I'm going to groom him, I'm going to work with him. It's almost more fun when you're picking 80. But at some point, and I get your point about there is time, by the end of next year, you need to know. Like it's not possible to sort of monkey around in 2027 too much. You've got to know by the end of 26.
Just on that point about bringing like a rookie in or bolter, Rassie and Jacques Nienaber before were very big on that, because it's also the opposition has less analysis on the player. Even though he's played like URC or something before, he's less of a known quantity, and if they back him to handle the pressure, he's gold, because the opposition don't necessarily know everything about him and the threats he will pose. So it's almost like a little surprise package that they have in their pockets, and then the known quantities as well. So maybe we not see what Rassie has in store for us. There might be a whole group of players that he's got coming through that he's going to unleash. If you just look at the way the last few years have gone, we wouldn't have seen some of these players coming through as soon as they have, even though the side has to get younger, if I can put it that way. So it's going to be a very interesting end of your tour. And what you're saying also, I don't know how many times in the last 2 years people said, okay, this is the time that, we're going to see him move away from the older players and just bring in the younger players, when it hasn't necessarily been the case. It's just, and I think I've got a theory around that. He's not going to throw away the older players completely. It's just going to be more of I'm going to pick from this pool. I might just take 7 players from a group of 20 or 14, whatever it ends up being. And he doesn't necessarily have to say to Franco, Mostert, or guys like that, your test career is over, because things change very quickly. You have injuries like we saw with the number 8, and then you just have to bring in an older guy to complement some younger guys. But I would say the most important thing is who those younger players are. If we can grow that middle band in terms of experience to kind of offset the loss of more older guys who have to be phased out. I don't know exactly who. I've got a few ideas, as I've said, but because there's a lot of guys they're still adding value. I mean, who's going to Pieter-Steph du Toit is one of the best players in the world. He's going to be over 33. Cheslin Colby, Damien Delendi. This, like you say, is very long, but who doesn't go, and then who comes in to take that role?
What I love about Pieter-Steph is that people say, "Oh, he had a bad game," or he's back in form in Wellington. And I'm looking at his Eden Park performance, and I was there live, and I watched how much he worked in sort of a scheme that had him working probably too far and too long. And I thought every other forward is wishing that their best game was like the worst game of Pieter-Steph. Like, he just doesn't have a bad game in him. His so-called quiet games, he has 11, 8, and 5 or something like that. His stat sheet's ridiculous on Battle Stats. I'm interested in your theory about sort of having old for old. Like, you have instead of grouping things so much, again, rigidly in these sort of positional groups, the idea that you have sort of a cloud of older experienced, proven players who it's all going to just be about physique. Is your physical okay? You still want it mentally. But as long as you're in that group, you're like for like. And then you have another group, maybe the 2 middle groups, actually, where there's still things to be known. There's still teams you might not match up well with. You have flaws in your game that you haven't recognized yourself, or you're having to add a skill to play Tony Ball. And then you have the young. It's the young that we're all the least sure about. We know we need guys like Elrich Lowe to play more games in 2026. Absolutely. He's got to just get games under his belt, back again from injury. It's psychological, hard. It's very hard. You want Wessels to be out there playing. You want guys, just showing themselves. But then you look at under 20s, and you look at this talent level, and you look at guys like, I don't know, Julius. Like could be like who's the next hooker? Who's the next Ethan Hooker? And I think, I'd like to see Julius in that run of play. I'd like to see Johnny Roche doing that kind of stuff. If we're going to play that, yeah.
They were under 20s a couple of years ago. We go through this every year. We almost forget about the last crop of junior box who are tearing it up already in URC. Like Julius is a good example. Maybe people judge him too harshly and forgets when he makes mistakes. He was only playing under 20 a couple of years ago. There's a few guys in that kind of zone who, Rassie's got his eye on. And I think mostly it's backs, because we do need younger backs, but we do also need to keep an eye on the forwards, bringing a few younger forwards through. Rion Nokia and Bessel's probably fall into that category of being among the younger players. But it'll be interesting to see like a Shlakane or someone like that who comes in and just how they get phased in and maybe just get exposed a bit more. Not necessarily like looking towards 27, but maybe they surprise Rassie. Maybe they come and show him that they're ready. That's why I think the end of year tour is going to be very interesting. We always say, we keep saying this is going to be the watershed. This is going to be the watershed. But I think that might actually be the tour where you see not a passing of a baton, but a changing in the balance of the squad. I can put it that way.
Along with Rassie's comfort with chaos and change and all that, he's also in this insanely meticulous planner. It's the two sides of him, right? That's fascinating as a human being, and why we all are Rassiologists trying to understand him. Do you think, and this is just purely speculation, so it's fine, we're labeling it as speculation. Do you think that he does group things more in age or caps? Because some coaches are just about caps, and you could be 30 years old, having played, a decade in the Urk and a few more years over in France, whatever, but it's still about test caps. Not a game is not a game is not a game. It's all different levels. And others, might be looking at age. Which one of the two things do you think he's actually got the most spreadsheets on or the most attention on?
Well, he speaks a lot about caps, about getting guys up to a certain amount of caps. He speaks about age. A guy like Sasha, he probably wouldn't have been in the running for the last World Cup, even though he went with the South African A team overseas in 2022, because Rassie has that 24 borderline where he's going to pick his fly if he's older than 24. He's been around the block a few times. So it's a kind of, I'm not sitting on the fence when I'm saying that, but it is like case to case. Some guys are just ready for it, and some guys, take a bit of a while to come through. But I think generally he would like to take a team that's pretty cap heavy without being too old. So it's going to be a challenge, because the easiest thing in the world to do is just to take all those old guys. And like you said, if they had to go tomorrow, that would be fair. 15 players who 33 and older, they wouldn't do South Africa. They wouldn't shame South Africa. The performance will be there. But would they achieve the goals that they wanted to achieve? Would they be able to play the rugby they want to play? That would be the question. So do you need more of the younger guys to come through? And also the thing we're not talking about, which is harder to quantify, is how those younger guys affect the older guys. Rassie himself has spoken about the culture, and you can't let the older guys run the whole thing. Even though they're the senior players, they've been around the block a few times. They need the younger guys to motivate them. Guys are fighting for their spots now. Even a guy like Eben Etzebeth is not guaranteed a place. He has to fight for his spots, and that's healthy. That's what makes them successful. So if you have too many older guys, I think Rassie's always got that 2011 World Cup in the back of his mind when he went with the Springboks to New Zealand as a technical advisor and saw all the older players didn't train on a Monday, and it just wasn't the same culture as it is now. And I think he's wary of that. So that balance is always going to be forefront in his mind.
Yeah, because along with the experience, which gives you so much to work with, there's also battle scars. And sometimes, like all of us, those scars are not good for you. Like I was thinking about that play in the game where Ethan Hooker takes the ball. It's way behind where the forwards are. It's sort of in a danger spot, but he just puts his head down and runs, and it's glorious. And you think, I don't know if the older player does that, because the percentages don't favor you do that. And I know the game was in a good shape and all that, but still, it's a ballsy thing at however old he is and 2 caps in, and whatever people yelling in his ear, and he just waved them off and said, I'm going to go on a bit of a joel here. I wonder how it's going to work out. And it turns out it works out brilliantly. I love that idea of having just enough spice. But let's go over I'll just throw some names. We'll do quick hits on what we learned, what you think the guys learned, the coaches learned about these players this year so far. So let's go Willie Leroux, and then I'll do my reaction as well. What do you think they learned?
Willie Leroux, everybody you speak to, he adds massive value. He's almost like a second coach on the field. And I think there were a few moments in Auckland when he was throwing good passes. He was communicating well, like controlling the players well. But it just does seem to be a difference when he has to go into contact or, has to move on defense. It's noticeable. And I got to admit, I got caught up in the hype a bit. He's been a great sim for South African rugby, the 100 tests. But even in that game in PE, he was a bit, he wasn't at his best. And I was kind of like, is this his last year? Or maybe he can surprise us and he takes his game up a bit. But something's definitely got to change. I don't know on this performance whether he can go to the next World Cup. But then it presents an opportunity for someone else. I mean, we do have other options. And now, the problem now, you asked me about Willie. Fassie's injured now. We don't know how long he's going to be injured for. Who comes in? Willems is the natural guy to go back to 15. But then who's the next cab off the rank? Does Quan Horn come in, or do you keep Billy in the squad? So these are going to be the interesting questions that the Bok management are going to wrestle with in the next couple of months. And then that affects the question of, do they go to the World Cup? I don't think they'll get rid of Willie completely, even if he goes to the World Cup as a Dwayne Vermeulen type coach in the backline capacity. So it's going to be interesting to see how they manage him.
I'm the same. I think once your brain and your body is not okay with the contact area, the collision zone, and scrambling around, finding around in the dark and the mud for a knife kind of stuff, I don't think you get it back, but immense value as a player coach, as a lot of times World Cups get decided by who's the weakest player in your 34. And if Vili's the weakest player, then we're in pretty good shape, because the man is just an ultimate bowler, like a Beauden Barrett. Beauden Barrett gets his critics in New Zealand, but and he's not the best in contact anymore as well, but he's still a guy you want in the squad. I think we're covered, though, with Fassie and Willems and Sasha at 15. So I think he's probably one of the guys who slides down. What a servant. Let's jump to a guy like Pollard, which is a very interesting question. If Mani can sort his goal kicking and avoid overplaying like at Ellis Park, which always has to also be a coach's problem too, because someone's giving you instructions. If Sasha can find durability and maybe stay out of some of those tackle zones he doesn't need to be in, a la Nas Botha. Where does Pollard sit? Is he still the clear, king of the knockouts 2027, or is that also big question mark for you? For me, it is. And I very much back Pollard, but I think if you take the counterfactuals I just did, absolutely in question, because Mani does ignite more and Sasha can do it all.
It's interesting because we haven't really spoken about how the leadership group gets affected through all these kind of selections. And I think he's a massive central figure in the whole squad, almost like a captain of the backline kind of thing, even whether he's not playing or not. And we spoke about the goal kicking. It's massive. If Mani gets his goal kicking right, it puts pressure on Andre to develop other areas of his game. And it's interesting you asked me that question about Willie and Pollard back to back, because that seems to be the thing. You have to select them together. And I know that Tony Brown's been putting a lot of pressure on Pollard to become more of a attacking player, play flatter to the gain line. Is he hitting the right heights that we expect him to play in a Tony ball? That's a good question. But then the other guys, do they have the maturity or decision-making capability to run a system like that? So to make when is it too much Tony ball? When do we need to pull it back a bit? When do we have to kick for the corners? Are you seeing that in the other players yet? Maybe it's a bit early for Sasha. They're not going to throw Andre Pollard away right now. But as you say, if we get to France and Ireland end of the year, who do they play there? Based on Wellington, you'd probably have Mani comes into the conversation again after people written him off a couple of weeks before. It's going to be very interesting to see whether Andre gets that number one spot going on that tour. And Sasha, depending on how things are going the next couple of months as well, is going to be pushing for that.
Let's take the sort of ball of forwards that I'll describe as people who've been in and out of bomb squads, but also pushing. So you have Argia, you have Mostert, you have Lewitt, and you have Ruan. And I'll throw in Kwacha as well. These guys all make it. Is there a clear front runner to be a bomb squad versus a starter? Lewitt versus Ruan on the line, I call that kind of stuff. Like, who in 2025 has shown us they're still on the way up, and who has shown us, I don't know.
It's interesting with Lewitt because we've always been optimistic about him coming back. He's like the biggest line-out genius in the squad, and unfortunately, he's got injured again now. So now I'm not sure how long he's going to be out for. Apparently, it's quite serious shoulder injury. Hopefully, it's not out too long because he's been preparing for this moment. Rassie's been backing him to come back. the whole structure of their game is they still, even though it's not a 6-2 split, it's still very much geared towards a strong finish from the bomb squad, and he's been used there. So who slots in now? We saw Archie Snyman coming back now. Is he the guy? Quacker Smith, I don't know. He had a bit of a quiet start, and like a few other Japanese players, he's got stronger as the season's gone on. You saw he took the ball off the back of that scrum, made a lot of impacts in Wellington as well. It's more about I think it's more about the backline makeup. We'll talk about earlier, how you want to use your backs. Bring in a big Andre Estes, and is the flank position a red herring? I don't know. We haven't really seen that in the bigger games. Who do you have? Do you have Sasha on the bench and Hooker like we saw in Auckland? I don't know. I'm actually a fan of that. It gives you a lot of options towards the end of the game. And Sasha's a great goal kicker as well. So they do have options. If you're talking about from an age profile point of view, they could maybe afford to throw a few younger guys into the bomb squad mix. As we spoke about, just injecting some pace, some energy on the younger side, give it a bit more balance.
Exactly. So our closing question, I think, because we have to close, is going to be around the position I actually have the most worry about is Hooker at number 2. In every other position, I actually see clear top performers, world class. I see good backups you can trust. I see horses for courses where there's not even really a starter and a backup. It's just horses for courses, like at 9 and 10, maybe even 15. I get to Hooker and I say, there's just certain things that a hooker has to do. And a lot of times you entrust a win or you come back from a certain loss through the line out. So that's just unavoidable unless we start having other people throw in. How do you see that with Bongi sort of looking like he's on his final legs, Mark's having a little bit of the return of the yips at line out, and then not a clear Akkad or, like it seems like we're throwing guys in there and they're still at very low caps, Fenter or Grobbelaar or, just no one's sort of nailing that down and saying, pick me.
It was quite a small group. He picked, Rassie said there was about 8 hookers on his radar at the beginning of the year, but they only picked about 3 for the initial squad, which was interesting. And unfortunately, I think Bongi's drop in form obviously wasn't planned for. I think Rassie was banking on him playing quite a few games this year and kind of alternating with Malcolm. And that hasn't quite happened, because if you look back in the past few years, Bongi's always been the starter. Malcolm's been the captain of the bomb squad. So they've had to kind of revise the whole strategy, the whole bomb squad strategy, with Malcolm playing more as a starter. And it's just different, if I can put it that way. But Jan Hendrik Wessels hasn't done bad. He's obviously got a future there. And a guy like Marnus, I think he's more of a like for like of a Malcolm in terms of, you look how strong he is at the set piece, brilliant breakdown exponents. So will he get more exposure in the years to come? If there are a few injuries, as you say, then it becomes a case of, do you bring a guy like Grobbelaar back? It's interesting. He wasn't even part of the squad. As big as their squad is, I'm surprised they didn't have an extra hook in there, maybe just to expose them a bit more, give them a few more options. So maybe a really young guy, like expose them to the systems now, and then knowing he might slot in if Malcolm goes down with injury or, so that's, as you say, that's definitely a room for improvements. I think they had Ethan Bester on the pecking order, Andre Hugo Fenter. So when does a guy like that get more opportunities or just like come into the squad? There's definitely something to look at.
All right, so this part, this ending part was good for us. We prevent us from being Vengat. We have a problem at hooker. One of our best young players is called Hooker, but we're having trouble with the mid-range hooker who's got 10 plus caps. We don't have any that we really can turn to in times of trouble. So that will keep us grounded. Jon, it's been fascinating. It's both encouraging and also intriguing to look at this through what we think are Rassie's eyes. Who knows? He could change everything in a moment. But we're banking on the planning part of his brain, which is predictable, that everything will be thought through. Thanks again for coming on Lekker Rugby Pod. I know our listeners and viewers love you, and we like having different looks at the same questions.
Thanks a lot, Harry. Thanks for having me.
This is the Lekker Rugby Pod, only on Megaphone Rugby.